Hi, welcome back to Christine's Home Affairs. Last week I showed you how I went about building this piece of fabric from my scrap pile, and what I've also done is stitched all my scrappy pieces of fusible fleece together to make a nice big piece of fusible to stabilise the back of the fabric. I received tons of comments which are fabulous, thank you. One of the comments: I want to make a tote 12 inches wide, 7 inches deep, 15 inches high. What would the measurements be with 2 boxed corners? Rather than using my brain to work that out, we're going to work that out together, make the bag and work out what measurements we're going to need to make this particular bag. The other suggestion was that we could line it with denim or canvas to strengthen it. So I have some denim and we're going to use that as well, just to give it a little bit more stability or make it more robust on the inside as well. Let's get to it. Okay, I have a little drawing here. The easiest way to work out what size we need for fabric is to make a little diagram. This is our bag. We want 12 inches across the front, 7 inches across the base, and we want 15 inches in height. So these are our finished measurements. We need to allow for seams and we also need to allow for our box corners. We're going to keep this bag very simple in that rather than having fabric folding over on the inside, we're just going to have our seam right along the very top. I'm also going to be using just the one whole piece of fabric instead of making 2 separate cuts. So if you want to make this with a directional fabric, you will make 2, a front and a back. But I'm just going to be using one and having the front and back all in one go. To work out how much fabric you need width-wise, you need to add the front of your bag plus half of the distance across the sides, which are the size of your box corners. So that is 3.5 inches on each side. I'll put the metric measurements up as soon as we know what they are. Likewise, when we have 15 inches in height here, when we cut the fabric out for the box corners, you're going to lose that 3.5 inches from the side of your bag. We need to allow for that as well. So when you're working out the height of your fabric, you'll have to add 3.5 inches for the size of the box corner. When you're working out the width of your fabric, you need to add 2 box corners to that, which is your 7 inches. So it's 19 inches for the width of this piece of fabric. You've got your 15 inches here for the length, which will come down and go across to the centre here. You've got 15 and 3.5, which is 18.5 inches, which will be your height, and half of the base to the centre here. So that's 18.5 inches. I'm using one continuous piece of fabric here to go all the way around. So we'll double that, which will make that 37 inches. The length of the fabric that I need for this bag is 37 inches, and the width that I need for this bag is the 12 plus 3.5 inches twice. At the moment, we haven't taken into account any seam allowances. We don't have to worry about anything in the centre because we're using one piece of fabric. We've got a seam allowance at the top here, and we have a seam allowance at the top here. We have a seam allowance on the side and on this side as well. So for the 2 top seams, I'm allowing a 1 centimetre seam or 3/8 of an inch. So I will add 2 centimetres to that, or 3/4 of an inch. So I've got the fabric size plus my 2 seam allowances for the entire length, and we have that for both sides. So for the full length, we have 37 3/4 of an inch. For the width, up to the side seams, we have 19 3/4 of an inch. That allows for a seam on each side. So all we need to cut out our fabric is 37 3/4 of an inch by 19 3/4. That's length by width, or 96 by 50 centimetres. And the only other thing we need are a couple of bits of fabric or webbing for our handles. All right, I've gone and cut all the fabric pieces that we're going to need for this bag. I've got a long length of strapping for the handles. There was a little bit of fabric left over from the fabric sheet that I had made the other day, so I figured I might as well use that for some pockets. So we have 2 pieces for the pockets, and these 2 pieces will be the linings for the pockets. The sizes will be up on the screen very shortly. I'm going to be lining this with a piece of denim, and then we have our main piece of fabric all cut up and ready to go. Now, if you want to make this with regular quilting cotton or whatever type of fabric that you like, you can go ahead and do that with just one big solid piece of fabric. You don't have to go and piece everything together like I've done here. And I've also gone and put my Christine Made It label on the bag. I'm going to try a new product as well that I came across a couple of weeks ago. And this is a magnetic closure, but it has these little clamps that sit on the top of the bag when we finish. So I'm going to give that a go as well. So I guess the first thing we're going to do is work on the pockets. Grab your 2 lining pieces and your 2 coloured pieces, and we'll place those right side together. And we're going to leave a small opening at the bottom edge. So along here, we're going to sew from here all the way around, come back to here, back stitch at the beginning and the end. When I sew into corners, I like to sew into the corner and then back stitch for 2 stitches and then go forward. As I turn, I'll go forward for 2 stitches and back for 2 and continue on. And I'll do that on each of my square corners. I do this for nearly all of my bags. So we will go and sew up both of those pockets, leaving that small opening. What we can also do is take our webbing for the handles, fold that in half, and just cut that in half. Now the handles don't have to be the same length that I've got here. You can make them a little bit shorter or longer, just depends on what you like. Take your outer fabric, we'll fold that in half, find the centre, and the handles can also be positioned in any place that you like as well. What I usually like to do is fold the fabric in half and then fold it in half again. I'll pop a clip in that fold, open that out, and that's the position for the handles. So it's much easier than trying to think, okay, do I want 3 inches or 4 inches? Having it centered across the center is a little bit more balanced. And then you can make any adjustments that you might need. So I will bring that in just to the inside of the center. So if you need a measurement from the center, we'll go with 10 centimeters or 4 inches. On either side. And just double check that your handle is nice and straight going around. Go to the other side, and it's easier if you just flip the handle side over, line up the top edge on the other side, and then you can place the other handle on the other side as well. So let's sew the handles in place and we can sew up our pockets. For the pockets, the seam allowance doesn't really matter, you just do whatever you like. And we'll do exactly the same for the other pocket. And our seam allowance for this bag is going to be 1 centimetre when we do the seams and the joining your fabric. For the handle, I'm going to sew this at about 1/4 inch, and we'll triple stitch over each one of the pieces. Alright, so the handles are fixed in place. When we stitch the lining and the outer fabric together, we're going to have a 1 centimetre seam at the top. So that means when we stitch over the handles, we're actually going to be reinforcing them again, and that will just give us a lot more extra strength on those handles so they don't fall out. Our pockets are done. All we need to do is trim the corners. And we can turn these the right way out, poke your corners out so that they sit nicely, and we'll top stitch the top edge only. Alright, I've turned everything out the right way. I've got my opening along the bottom here, just clipped together for the time being. I'm going to go along and top stitch along the top edge of both of these pocket pieces. I'll go and do that now and I'll be right back. Let's find the centre of these pocket pieces. We'll fold the fabric in half. So I've got a little mark in the centre at the top. We can grab our lining piece, fold that in half, mark a crease, and we'll do that at both ends. And bring your top edges together. And we need to determine where our pocket's going. Now remember, this fabric piece is much bigger than the finished bag will be. It's going to come in 3.5 inches on each side, and it's also going to be 3.5 inches shorter as well, because we've got the box corners to take into account. So if I imagine that folded up, that will be the base of the bag, that's the bottom. We can place our pocket anywhere within this area here, and I think that looks about right. That's 4.5 inches or about 12 centimetres from the top. I think I'm happy with that placement. So I'll pin that to one side. And we'll open that out and do the same to the other side. So we can go and sew both of those pocket pieces in place. Sew down the side, along the bottom and across the side. That will close up those openings that we have. I like to put channels in my pockets for a pen, or even just so that I can put my glasses in there. So what I might do is sit my glasses in the side like this, and then I have a bigger section on the other side. So once this is stitched in place, I'll just sew another channel right along here, about 1 inch away from the outside edge. And I'll do that with both pockets. At the top, you want to reinforce that really well. So that's the pocket sewn in place. I'm going to move about 1 inch in from the outside edge, starting at the bottom of the pocket, so the opening is along here. And sew straight up to the top. And that is the pockets done. Let's open this out now. Grab our outer fabric and we can place that right sides together. Line up those edges. We'll pin it right across the top there, and that will be sewn in place as well. And we'll do the same for the other end. All right, 1 centimetre seam allowance all the way across both edges. Where the handles are, I'm going to be triple stitching over that again. So that's going to give that, so far, 6 rows of stitching on each section. And then when we top stitch, that'll be even more again. I've also ironed this fabric on both top edges, and I've ironed it so that the seam at the back goes toward the lining. It's going to help me fold this fabric over later and have those top edges sitting nice and evenly. Let's turn this inside out and we'll bring the top edges together, lining that up nice and evenly. And then you can clip the edges together all the way down both edges. On the lining, we're going to leave an opening for turning the bag through. So I'll leave an opening of about the width of my hand. And once you've clipped all of those edges, you can sew down the entire length. Because we're going to have our box corners, there's a couple of options that you have. If you just want to do a really quick, simple box corner, you can fold the bottom edge of your fabric up 3.5 inches and clip it in place, and you'll sew straight down. But I want proper box corners because that's the way I like my bags to look. And you would do that on both sides. Because we've got the 3.5 inch box corner, what we want to do is measure from the bottom fold 3.5 inches, which is 9 centimetres, and just make a mark there. Do that on each corner. And if you're just going to make regular box corners like I'm doing on this one, then you can start sewing just beyond that. Do a back stitch along here, continue on all the way to the other end. Just stitch beyond that mark, back stitch there as well. There's no need to sew this section because we're going to be trimming that off. And don't forget to leave an opening on one side of the lining for turning the bag through. Now, whilst it's quicker to start at the other end and sew all the way down to the opposite end, I actually prefer to start sewing at the top of my bag where these seams are going to meet. It gives me the chance to double check that everything is lined up nicely, and I'll stitch over this top section. And that way the fabric isn't going to shift on me and those seams are going to line up really well. And then I'll sew to the end. On the other side, I'll do the same thing. And then I'll go back to the top and sew the lining section closed. Now linings quite often tend to be really baggy on the inside, so where I've done a 1 centimetre seam allowance on the outer fabric, I'm going to taper this in just a couple of millimetres more, and that will tighten up the lining. I'll leave my opening here, move on forward, all right, all that's left now is to box the corners. From the stitching line here, we're going to measure out 3.5 inches or 9 centimetres, because remember we want a 7-inch boxed corner. And from the fold, we're also measuring 3.5 inches. And this measurement on the side is being taken from the stitching line, not from the outside edge. I don't want to cut these corners off today because that would muck up my seam allowance. So I'm actually just going to draw that 3.5 inches in, and this will become my stitching line rather than the cut line. So I'll pop a pin on into the fold just so that you can see what I'm about to do. Separate the fabric, and where this line and this line meet at the corner, pinch that together. Do the same on the other side. Secure that in place, and then just even this out. Doesn't matter what happens on the corner up here because it's going to be cut off soon anyway. And if you measure from here to here, you'll get 7 inches. So that's going to be the finished size of the base of our bag. We'll now go and sew straight across there, right after we've done the other corners. So once again, just pinch out the corner, so on the lining side we'll do exactly the same. Take that measurement from the stitching line, and we'll pinch those corners out as well. And just double check your measurements as you go. So now we can go and sew straight across those markings we've made. I've accidentally filmed the ceiling instead of the sewing, so let's just pretend I've sewn up all those ears. Okay, we are almost done. So before we cut off the little ears that we have for our box corners, we're going to bring the outer fabric and the lining fabric together. You'll want the same side meeting up as well. Line up the stitching lines, and we'll take this back to the machine and sew straight over that line we've just stitched. Find the ear on the other side, follow that seam along until you get to the other end, and you'll just have to scrunch this up and line up those seams as well. Let's go finish this. So I've got both of those lined up evenly. Okay, now we're done. We've got our little flaps at the bottom on each side. It's up to you if you want to cut these off or not. Given that this is going to be quite a robust bag, I would probably prefer to leave these little ears on, and that way it'll help prevent the bottom of the bag sag a little bit. But it's completely up to you. But for this one, we'll cut the ends off. And when you cut those off, you can actually reuse these bits in your next project. Let's find the opening. And we'll start pulling everything through. And once you've turned everything the right way out, we're going to go and top stitch. And if you remember to iron this before, it's going to be much easier to fold these edges over. And top stitch it all in place. When I top stitch, I like to have my bags inside out. And that way, as I'm sewing, the outer fabric is faced up and I can actually see what's happening. And that way I have more control over what I'm sewing. Once you've clipped the edges at the top, find the opening along the side as well. And you can pinch those edges together. And sew that closed. So you can make this bag reversible. If you want to do that, then I would probably recommend hand stitching this instead. But otherwise, if you're just going to keep this on the inside, just go and top stitch along there. I'm going to actually hand stitch this closed so it looks a little bit neater. Let's go do the top stitching. I've increased my stitch length to 4.5. So with the top stitching done, the last thing left to do is close up this side seam, and I will bring the needle in at the opening here. The thread's got a knot in the end, and I'm going to bring the needle out up on the edge of the seam there. That will hide the knot on the inside. And I'll just pick up a thread from the back fabric, bring that up and come in on the other side of the fabric, on the other seam, and I'll just go in and out on opposite sides into the edge there, out on the other side. So I'm just going into the folds on each side as I go. So it's into the fold on one side and out of the fold on the other. And when I get to the end, I'll just bring the needle under one more time. There's the loop in my thread. I'll pass the needle through once, and then I'll pass the needle through one more time and pull that. And then we can bring the needle through the seam. And so I've got the needle going in over here. I'm going to bring it out about 1/2 inch away. And then cut that thread off. And the tail will sit inside the bag. So that's a little bit neater than top stitching the outside edge. if you want to make this a reversible bag. And there we have it. We've got our 12 inches across here, 7 inches across here, and I think it was 15 inches across the length or height. And we have a little channel on the inside for our pens or glasses. And there is our bag, completely finished. You can take this a little bit further if you wanted this to have obvious lines going down on the side. Find the base of your bag here, and at this corner you pinch the fabric out, and you'll come along to the top here and go and top stitch that edge and then this edge. That's going to give you your 7 inches across the side on each side, and it will also give you your 12 inches across the front and back. So you can have it as a much more structured bag by sewing straight down along here. But I'm actually going to leave this exactly like that. Now, I've nearly forgotten to put that magnet in. So this is a little bit different in that all you need to do is actually clamp this over. So if we find the centre of our bag, we'll line up the side seams. I'll mark the centre at the top. You want to have the button side of your magnet facing the inside of your bag. So place that flange over the top edge of your fabric, and you'll squeeze that shut. I'll get something to clamp it closed in a minute. Do the same on the other side. So the button faces the inside. Line that up over the centre. I've got a clamp here that I use for my key fobs, and I've just put electrical tape on the end to protect the fabric. Squeeze that closed. So that seems to be holding that in place rather well. You could even put a couple more along there if you wanted to as well, but I'm happy with that. So how was that? There's your finished bag. How colourful is that too? From that one piece of fabric that I built up the other day. If you didn't watch the previous video where we used a whole bunch of scrap fabrics and rebuilt a piece of fabric, I'll pop a link in the description below so you can watch that. But I ended up using that entire sheet that I'd made up. That went into the main part of the bag, as well as the remainder of it going into those 2 little pockets on the inside. So it's completely reversible. I don't mind that little magnet. It's a great one to use if you forget to put buttons or zips or something, or you just want to close something up at the top. Handle is a good size. Of course, you can go and make that longer if you want to wear that across your body, and it's easy enough to go over your arm. I have to show you what fabric I had left over after all of that. When we cut out the box corners, we had those 2 little scraps of fabric left. They will go back into the next fabric building exercise that I have. And then this is all that's left as well from that whole sheet of fabric that I'd made the other day. So I'm pretty pleased with that. Gets rid of a whole lot of scrap fabric that I have. Well, actually didn't get rid of a whole lot of scrap fabric because I've still got a whole lot more. It means that I now have to go and make some more. But I hope that has answered the question to the viewer that asked, what size fabric do I cut out to have a 12 by 15 inch bag with a 7-inch base? As I said, if you want to have this much more structured, pinch the bottom edge together, the top edge together, and sew straight down there, and that will give you a really nice square bag. I like this. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this video and I shall catch you next time. Bye for now.